I'll never forget the sound of that clock striking 8 in the morning. It was my son's first day of school at his new institution, a renowned school here in Texas, where everyone seemed to live in a perfect American dream. The mothers, with their steaming coffees in hand, said goodbye to their children with proud smiles. I smiled too, but inside, something tightened in my chest. I knew how much each letter, each word, was a mountain for him to climb. From a young age, Daniel struggled with dyslexia. I remember the nights he cried, trying to read simple sentences while the letters danced before his eyes. "Dad, why is it so easy for everyone else, but not for me?" he would ask. I told him that God gives difficult battles to his best warriors, and he believed it. He believed in me. But on that day, something told me that his faith would be tested. The kind of test that doesn't come on paper, but in sharp looks and words. Before continuing, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, because we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, because His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. I couldn't imagine that, in less than 24 hours, my son's dignity would be ripped away in front of 40 people. And worse, by the hands of the very person who should have protected him. What nobody knew was that that man, the teacher, was about to learn the most important lesson of his life, a lesson that would come from a boy he considered weak. That day began with the sun shining brighter than usual, reflecting off the tall school windows. Daniel walked beside me, carrying his navy blue backpack and the new notebook he had chosen himself. The main gate seemed immense, and for a moment I perceived the fear hidden behind his smile. "Everything will be all right, son," I said, trying to sound calm. He nodded, tightening his shoelace as if it gave him courage. When the bell rang, he took a deep breath and went into the classroom. I watched him mingle with the other children, each one more confident than the next. And, for a moment, I wondered if I had made the right choice in putting him there. The room was modern, filled with colorful posters bearing motivational quotes. But there was something in the air, a disguised coldness, perhaps. The professor, a middle-aged man named Mr. Collins, entered with firm steps, carrying a stack of books and a look that suggested he owned every passing second. He greeted the students without smiling. Daniel watched everything in silence. He had always been curious, but shy. When the teacher asked each student to say their name and something they liked to do, he waited until the end of the line. "My name is Daniel, and I like to draw," he said softly. The teacher simply wrote something down on the paper and moved on to the next person, without looking up. In the following days, I noticed that Daniel came home quieter. When I asked him how his day had been, he would only say, "Fine." But there was a sadness in his tone that I knew well. A sadness that a father feels, but that a son tries to hide. One day, while reviewing his assignments, I noticed some words were mixed up. "Focus, son, try again," I said. He tried, and failed again. Then he lowered his gaze and whispered, "Mr. Collins said I should try to be less lazy." That pierced me like a blade. Lazy? My son? The same boy who spent hours trying to write me a letter without asking for help? The next day, he woke up silently. He drank his coffee without touching the toast and stared at the kitchen clock. I knew he was trying to prepare himself for something, and that something was destroying him inside. When I dropped him off at school, he hugged me tighter than usual. Hours later, I received a call from the school. The secretary, in a tense voice, said that there had been a small incident in the classroom. I dropped everything and went there. When I arrived, I saw the hallway full of students whispering. In the background, I heard a raised voice, the teacher's. I opened the door slowly and saw Daniel standing before the class, holding an open book. He was trying to read, stumbling over words, mixing up syllables, while the teacher stared at him impatiently. Some students chuckled softly. "Come on, Daniel, just read." "It's not that difficult," said Mr. Collins sarcastically. Each mistake felt like an open wound. I could see my son's face turning red, his eyes welling up with tears. "I'm sorry, sir," he whispered, almost voicelessly. The teacher sighed deeply. "Sorry isn't enough. You need to try harder. No one will spare you just because you're slow." I wanted to scream, to stop it. But something stopped me. I stood there, watching the scene, and something inside me changed. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, a mixture of pain, helplessness, and faith being tested. When the teacher turned his back, Daniel looked at me, and our eyes met. I will never forget that look. It was the look of someone who had lost faith in the world. I knew, in that instant, that nothing would ever be the same again. That night, Daniel didn't want dinner. He stayed locked in his room, drawing. When I came in, he showed me the drawing, a boy standing in front of a huge mountain. "That's me, Dad. Trying to read." I sat down beside him, trying to hold back tears. I spent the night thinking about every word he said, every laugh he heard, and every injustice that went unanswered. God knows how much I prayed for wisdom that night. Lord, show me what to do. Guide me. And when the sun rose, something inside me already knew what was coming. I had to act, but not as a wounded man, but as a father who trusts in God's justice. The next morning, I put on my suit, grabbed my briefcase, and went to school. The principal greeted me with surprise. After all, he had no idea who I really was. And even less so the teacher who, at that moment, was teaching as if nothing had happened. But he was about to find out. That morning, I entered the school silently, without telling anyone. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallways, and each step seemed heavier than the last. I remembered Daniel's trembling voice from the previous night, and that gave me strength. I wasn't just an indignant father. I was a man guided by something greater, by the certainty that the truth needed to be seen. When I arrived at the observation room, I asked the headmistress for permission to discreetly watch Mr. Collins's class. She hesitated, but agreed. "He's a good teacher, sir. Sometimes strict, but efficient," she said, trying to soften the blow. I just smiled. Little did she know that sometimes what seems like strictness is pure pride disguised as method. On the other side of the glass, I watched the professor enter with the same air of authority. He adjusted his tie, straightened his expensive watch on his wrist, and began the lecture. His voice was firm, but there was something about it that bothered me, a cutting coldness, a constant need to be admired. He seemed more interested in displaying power than in teaching. The students settled down quickly, as if they knew that a simple lapse in their gaze could cost them a scolding. He liked being feared, and, strange as it may seem, he seemed to feed on the students' silent submission. While I was writing on the board, I noticed that Daniel was in the last row, trying to hide behind the others. The teacher began asking questions. He called the students by name, praising those who answered correctly and subtly mocking those who answered incorrectly. When it was Daniel's turn, the atmosphere changed. He took a few seconds to answer. "Come on, Daniel, it's not that difficult, is it?" said the teacher, with that arrogant half-smile. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked down, fidgeting with his fingers, trying to organize the words in his head. I think that," he stammered. The professor snorted. "You think or you know? Because here we work with certainty, not with guesswork." The stifled laughter of some students cut through the air. My heart raced. It was the same scene he had described, but this time I was seeing it with my own eyes. I wanted to go in there and stop it all. But I stayed. Because sometimes God allows us to see evil in action so that justice can be revealed at the right time. The teacher approached Daniel, tapping his finger on the desk. "You need to try harder, kid. Life isn't going to give you a break just because you stumble over the letters." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes welling up with tears. And in that instant, I realized that this man didn't see students. He saw reflections of himself, and he hated what they reflected. As the lesson continued, Mr. Collins cast smug glances, as if each correction were a trophy. He said that error was a sign of weakness, that perfection was a matter of discipline. But those who strive for perfection forget that love teaches more than any rule. The minutes dragged on, and each of his words was a reminder of how many times Daniel must have swallowed his tears. How many times he heard that it wasn't enough. How many times shame turned into fear of trying again. I've seen the business world be cruel, but nothing compares to the cruelty that disguises itself as politeness. After class, I waited for the professor to leave. He walked down the hallway with the same haughty air. I greeted him with a simple, "Good morning." He replied disdainfully, without even looking me in the eye. The principal, beside me, murmured, "He's always like that, sir. Old-fashioned. Old-fashioned." But I knew. It wasn't tradition, it was ego. And ego, when not broken by life, ends up destroying others. That night, Daniel didn't say anything. He sat on the sofa and started drawing. He drew a tall man with a blurred face. "Is that Mr. Collins?" I asked. He nodded without looking up. "Why is his face blurred?" He replied, "Because he can't see me, Dad." That response shattered me. I went to my room, knelt beside my bed, and prayed. I asked God to show me the right path, not to let my heart be consumed by anger. And, in that silent prayer, something inside me began to change. I remembered the verse from Proverbs that says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Perhaps this was what God was preparing. Not just justice for my son, but a lesson for that man who had forgotten what it means to be human. In the following days, I observed from a distance. Daniel continued going to school, but the sparkle in his eyes had faded. He did his homework with effort, and even when he got it right, he seemed to doubt himself. The teacher rarely praised him, and when he did, it sounded false, like someone throwing crumbs to appear fair. One morning, the principal called me saying that Mr. Collins would like to speak with me. I accepted. I found it curious that the invitation came just after he learned that I was the father of the difficult student. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. I arrived punctually. He was waiting for me, standing behind the desk, with a rehearsed smile. "Sir, it's about Daniel's performance. Your son seems to have certain limitations," he said with feigned politeness. "He's intelligent, of course, but perhaps this school isn't the ideal environment for him." I took a deep breath, controlling the impulse to answer immediately. "And what do you suggest, Professor?" I asked. "Perhaps something more technical, less academic," he said, crossing his arms. It was then that I realized he didn't see potential, he saw burden. And, in that instant, I understood the kind of man I was facing. I looked him straight in the eye. "Professor, do you know what dyslexia is?" He shrugged. "I've heard of it. But honestly, I think it's just another modern excuse for lack of focus." That's when I realized it wasn't ignorance, it was contempt. He smiled. But it was a calm smile, the kind that's more frightening than a scream. "Interesting," I replied. "So you believe that a clinical diagnosis is simply a lack of focus?" He nodded, unaware of what was about to happen. At that moment, I felt a strange peace. A certainty that God was preparing me for the right moment, and that this moment wouldn't be today, but it would come soon. I said goodbye politely and left the room. As I walked down the hallway, I ran into Daniel coming out of the library. He hugged me and asked, "Dad, are you okay?" I said yes, and he smiled. That smile was a reminder that love still conquers fear. But, inside me, the plan was already laid out. And the professor, he had no idea what awaited him. What he didn't know, and nobody knew, was who I really was. And when the truth came out, there would be no more room for masks. Because his gaze, that look of superiority, was about to meet reality. And this time, he would have nowhere to hide. That Tuesday, the sky was gray. It seemed like even the weather knew something bad was about to happen. Daniel woke up silent, with that distant look that only a father can decipher. "Everything will be all right today, won't it?" he asked. I lied with a smile and said yes, but inside my heart was already trembling. At school, Mr. Collins began the class with more energy than usual. He seemed eager to prove something, perhaps to himself. The topic of the day was reading aloud, an activity that, for any other student, would be commonplace. But for Daniel, it was a battleground. He knew he would have to confront the unruly letters, those that jumbled before his eyes. Even so, he raised his chin, trying to show courage. I imagined him there, sitting in the middle row, with the book open and his hands sweating. "Let's start with you, Daniel," the teacher said, pointing suddenly. His name sounded like a sentence. The class turned to face him, some with pity, others with curiosity. Daniel took a deep breath and began to read. At first, his voice trembled. He read slowly, trying to pronounce each syllable carefully. But the letters became jumbled, changed places, and the words came out wrong. A murmur ran through the room, followed by small, muffled giggles. The teacher didn't interrupt him immediately. He just watched, arms crossed, his expression impatient. When Daniel stumbled for the third time, he let out an audible sigh. "Daniel, did you rehearse this at home?" he asked sharply. Daniel, embarrassed, nodded. "So it seems the rehearsal didn't do much good, did it?" The laughter grew louder. I could almost hear it, just imagining it. That scene tore me apart inside, even though I wasn't there at that moment. One of the students tried to stop them, saying, "Guys, stop it," but the teacher cut him off. "There's no need to defend him. He needs to learn how to deal with real life." It was cruel. A lesson in arrogance disguised as authority. Daniel tried to continue. He swallowed his tears, discreetly wiped his eyes, and read another sentence. But he stumbled again, reversing the letters. A boy's laughter echoed from the front. "It looks like he's reading it backwards," he mocked. The teacher did nothing. That was the first time Daniel had experienced public humiliation. And, what's worse, from someone who should have inspired him. He closed the book without asking permission and lowered his head. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Mr. Collins then approached, picked up the book from the table, and said, "You know what you lack, boy? Willpower. When I was a student, I studied until my eyes bled." That phrase, cold and vain, was etched into Daniel like a scar. The boy simply replied, "I'm sorry, sir." That was all he could say. And the teacher retorted, "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the class, who are wasting their time because of you." It was at that moment that something inside Daniel broke. Some students lowered their eyes, embarrassed. Others looked at the floor, unable to face the collective shame that hung in the air. But the teacher seemed to feed off that tension, as if he were proving a point that no one had questioned. When the bell rang, Daniel quickly left the room, avoiding eye contact. He went to the bathroom and stayed there alone, washing his face. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, trying to understand what he had done wrong. "Why can't I, God?" he whispered softly. And it was at that moment that he noticed something in his pocket, a small verse that I had written and placed there without him knowing. It said, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. That simple phrase was enough to stop him from giving up completely. But, deep down, the wound was done. He no longer saw school as a safe place, and he even began to doubt his own worth. When he got home, he didn't want to talk about his day. He sat on the floor of his room, drawing. I asked if everything was all right, and he replied, "Everything's fine, Dad, I'm just tired of trying." Those words destroyed me. Tired of trying. That night, I went to the school again. Not to confront anyone, not yet, but to observe. Outside, I saw Mr. Collins locking the classroom. He seemed satisfied, as if he had fulfilled his duty. What he didn't know was that God was already moving the pieces. Sometimes justice comes slowly, silently, but it comes. And, at that moment, I began to understand that my son's humiliation would only be the beginning of a turnaround that no one imagined. Days later, the story began to spread. One of the students, the one who had tried to defend him, told her parents what she had seen. And those parents, outraged, sent a letter to the principal. For the first time, Daniel's name began to be spoken not as that of the slow boy, but as that of the wronged boy. The professor, of course, was furious about the rumors. He gathered the class and said, "If anyone here is spreading rumors about me, they'll regret it." His tone was threatening. He wanted to erase any trace of the truth. But the truth cannot be erased. In the middle of his speech, Daniel raised his hand. "Sir, may I say something?" The entire room turned to him. The professor nodded, perhaps expecting another excuse. But Daniel took a deep breath and said, "I just want to learn. Even if it takes me longer, I want to keep trying." That phrase, simple and pure, cut through the air. Even the laughing students fell silent. Mr. Collins was speechless for a few seconds. Then he simply said, "Sit down." But his voice no longer had the same firmness. Daniel didn't know it, but at that moment something began to change. People started to see him differently. Some colleagues began to help him with his tasks. Others began to realize that, behind his shyness, there was a different kind of strength. And the teacher, for the first time, seemed bothered. Not by the mistake, but by the example. The faith and courage of a boy were dismantling the pride of a man who thought he knew everything. That week, when I went to pick him up, Daniel came out smiling. "Dad, I read 2 pages today. By myself." My heart swelled with pride. See, God never abandons those who believe. He hugged me and said, "But Mr. Collins still doesn't like me." I looked at him and replied, "Son, sometimes people don't like things that remind them of their own flaws." He didn't fully understand, but he smiled. And I knew time was about to reveal everything, because behind that first mistake there was a purpose, and the lesson that would come later. No one was prepared to witness it. That day, the sun seemed to have disappeared before it even rose. The air was heavy, and a different kind of tension hung over the school hallways. Daniel walked slowly, holding the book against his chest, as if the weight of the words themselves were too much to bear. He didn't know it, but what was about to happen would change everything. Mr. Collins entered the room earlier than usual. His face showed a mixture of impatience and frustration. Perhaps he had heard the comments circulating about his conduct. Perhaps he was trying to reassert his control in front of the students. The fact is, he was determined to teach a lesson, and Daniel would be the target. The class began in silence. The teacher paced back and forth, looking at each student as if searching for weakness. "Today, I want to see who is truly committed to learning," he announced. His voice echoed, cold and calculated. He chose the topic, reading and interpretation. A simple exercise, but, for Daniel, a huge challenge. I later learned from his classmates that the teacher called my son to the front of the class without giving him a chance to refuse. "You, Daniel, let's see if you've learned anything." The boy stood up slowly. Each step toward the picture felt like thunder in his chest. He held the book in trembling hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You may begin," said Mr. Collins, crossing his arms. And the humiliation began. Daniel began to read, his voice trembling. The letters seemed to dance, shifting places. He struggled to keep the rhythm, but stumbled over the words. "It's beautiful, not beautiful," the teacher corrected him mockingly. The class laughed. The laughter echoed like a sentence. "Again," he ordered. Daniel tried again, but missed again. The laughter grew louder. "Looks like even the alphabet doesn't like you, kid," the teacher mocked. The whole class burst into laughter, except for one girl, Lily, who covered her face, embarrassed in front of everyone. "Silence!" shouted the professor, slamming his book on the table. "Do you think the world will have patience with those who don't try? It won't. Life is hard, and nobody will wait for you to learn to read properly." He looked at Daniel as one might observe a failure. Daniel tried to explain, his voice choked with emotion. "Sir, I try, but sometimes the letters get mixed up," the teacher interrupted him abruptly. "Mixed up? Don't make excuses. You're just lazy, that's all." The sound of the word lazy, it cut through the air like a knife. The boy stood motionless, his eyes brimming with tears. An awkward silence spread. Even the wind seemed to stop. And then, slowly, the tears began to fall. "Look at me when I'm talking," the teacher demanded. Daniel looked up, his eyes red. "You need to make up your mind, Daniel. Do you want to continue being a burden to others, or are you finally going to act like a real student?" The words hurt more than shouts. They went deep, leaving invisible scars. The class was divided between fear and discomfort. No one dared defend the boy. The power the teacher wielded was suffocating. He turned the classroom into a courtroom, and Daniel was the condemned defendant without the right to a defense. Lily couldn't take it anymore. "Sir, he has dyslexia. My brother has it too," and, before she could finish, the teacher interrupted her with a brusque gesture. "Sit down. This isn't therapy. It's a school, and here you succeed through merit." The tone was cruel, almost inhuman. From that point on, everything became even heavier. Daniel tried to continue reading, but his voice trailed off in sobs. The teacher, impatient, snatched the book from his hands. "That's enough. You're wasting the class's time." The laughter, previously muffled, now became complicit. A spectacle of public shame was unfolding, and no one, absolutely no one, dared to stop it. The boy stood there, not knowing what to do. Then the teacher, pointing to the seat, said, "Sit down. And please, don't open your mouth until the end of the lesson." Daniel returned to his seat with short steps. His heart must have been broken. He sat down and looked out the window. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the wind, as if the whole world continued as normal, without a care. Meanwhile, the teacher continued the lesson, pretending that nothing had happened. The atmosphere grew heavy, and even the most playful students were serious. No one could look at Daniel. At the end of the lesson, Mr. Collins said cynically, "I hope everyone has learned something important today. Failure is a consequence of laziness." And then he smiled contentedly, as if he had accomplished something great. Daniel waited for everyone to leave the room before getting up. He walked slowly down the empty hallway. With each step, he felt the weight of shame and helplessness. When he reached the bathroom, he cried like never before. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with the sink water. He looked in the mirror and murmured, "I wish I were different, God. I wish I were normal." Outside, Lily waited, too afraid to go in. She left a note under the door, "You are not alone." When Daniel read it, he smiled for the first time that day. A small gesture, but enough to rekindle a spark of hope. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, I received a call. It was the principal. His voice trembled. "Mr. Miller, there's been a problem with Daniel." I dropped everything. Within minutes, I was in the car, my heart racing. When I arrived at school, I saw Daniel sitting on a park bench, his eyes swollen. The principal was trying to comfort him, but he wouldn't speak. Next to him, Mr. Collins, with his arms crossed, was saying, "Children need to learn from their own mistakes." It was at that moment that I felt something inside me break. A father endures a lot, but seeing a son destroyed by injustice is unbearable. I looked at him, and without raising my voice, said, "Mr. Collins, one day you will learn what humility is." He laughed sarcastically. "I highly doubt that, Mr. Miller. Here, I'm the one who teaches." And it was there, in front of everyone, that destiny began to move. Because what he didn't know, what nobody there knew, was that the man he had just humiliated was the owner of the school. The silence that filled the room that day was not merely an absence of sound. It was a heavy silence, filled with shame and regret. A silence that echoed every cruel word spoken minutes before. The laughter ceased. Heads bowed. Even the clock seemed to have stopped. Daniel was still sitting there, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. His hands trembled, and he tried to hide his tears. It was as if each second lasted an eternity. Mr. Collins, impassive, leafed through some papers, feigning normalcy, as if nothing had happened. The students exchanged silent glances. No one knew what to do. Some wanted to get closer, others wanted to disappear. Lily stared intently at Daniel, her heart broken, but too afraid to raise her voice again. The professor looked up and said, "Let's continue. Open to page 52. His voice sounded like an affront. It was an empty, cold command, like that of someone who had completely lost their sense of humanity. Nobody moved. The whole class stood motionless. A boy in the back tried to turn the page, but the sound of the paper was too loud in the deafening silence. Mr. Collins took a deep breath, annoyed. I said, "Page 52." But the room remained silent. The weight of injustice hung over everyone, suffocating. It was as if each person there had realized, at the same time, that something terrible had just happened. The teacher's authority no longer seemed firm, it was merely disguised fear. Daniel took a deep breath and raised his head for the first time. His eyes were red, but there was something different about them. It wasn't anger, it was a sad calm, a painful maturity. He looked at the teacher and, in a low voice, said, "I'm not lazy." The phrase echoed like thunder. Nobody moved. The teacher froze, not knowing what to answer. "What did you say?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. Daniel repeated, "I'm not lazy. I just see the letters differently." Lily began to cry. One of the boys in the front lowered his head, ashamed. The teacher cleared his throat, trying to regain control, That's irrelevant. The world won't care about your difficulties. Daniel replied firmly, But God does. The silence grew even heavier. His words echoed through the room, reaching even those who didn't believe. It was impossible not to feel something. The professor looked away, pretending to search for something on the table. For a moment, he lost his composure. At that moment, the principal appeared in the doorway. She had been urgently summoned by another teacher who had heard the commotion. "Mr. Collins, may we speak for a moment?" she asked in a tense tone. He tried to disguise his feelings. "Of course, just a moment." When he left the room, the atmosphere changed. The students began to move slowly. Lily went to Daniel, put her hand on his shoulder and said, "You were brave." He tried to smile, but the pain was still greater than the relief. She then whispered, "My brother also has dyslexia. I know how difficult it is." Daniel looked into her eyes, and for a moment, that small gesture made him feel less alone. It was as if God had sent an angel into the midst of chaos. In the hallway, the teacher and the principal were arguing quietly. But the thin walls allowed fragments of their sentences to slip through. Unacceptable behavior. Parents complaining. We need to review your conduct. With each word they heard, the students looked at each other, shocked. Some began to discreetly record the moment with their cell phones. Fear had transformed into curiosity, and, deep down, into a sense of justice about to awaken. Minutes later, the professor returned, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. "We're going to end class early today," he said, without looking at anyone. The students began to pack their things in silence. But everyone knew something was about to change. Daniel carefully put the book away, as one might guard a wound. When he passed the professor's desk, he looked at him and said softly, "I hope that one day you will learn what respect is." It wasn't a provocation. It was a request. A sincere request. Mr. Collins remained motionless. Inside, something within him was beginning to crumble. He knew he had gone too far, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. The kind of pride that would rather lose everything than ask for forgiveness. In the car, on the way home, Daniel was silent. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw his face reflected in the window. He seemed distant, exhausted. I tried to start a conversation, but he just said, "Dad, everyone was quiet today. Nobody laughed." It was strange. "Perhaps this is the beginning of something good," I replied, trying to sound hopeful. "Perhaps they have realized the truth." He looked at me and asked, "And Mr. Collins?" I sighed. "Son, sometimes God makes us see the downfall of the proud with our own eyes. But in His time." That night, after he fell asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and prayed silently. "Lord, may this silence that has fallen tonight not be fear. May it be the beginning of change." While I was praying, the phone rang. It was the principal. Her voice sounded nervous. "Mr. Miller, I'd like to schedule a meeting for tomorrow. It's important." I knew something was stirring, and it wasn't just school discipline. It was the beginning of a revelation. I hung up the phone and watched Daniel sleeping peacefully. I touched his hair and whispered, "You have no idea what God is preparing, my son." Outside, the wind was blowing strongly. It was as if the universe itself was announcing that something grand was about to happen. And the professor, the man who thought he had absolute control, still had no idea who I was. The next morning, the school seemed different. The hallways were quieter than usual, and the stairs were curious, almost uncomfortable. Something had changed since the previous day. Daniel's name was now in the hallways, not as the name of the boy who made mistakes, but as the name of the boy who had the courage to stand up to the teacher. I arrived at school early. The principal was waiting for me in the reception area, visibly tense. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming. The situation has escalated beyond what we expected." Her voice trembled. I simply replied, "That's how it is when the truth starts to come out." She led me to her office. There sat Mr. Collins, his hands clasped together, his face rigid. When I entered, he looked up, trying to maintain his composure. But there was something different, perhaps a hint of regret, perhaps just fear. "Mr. Collins," the principal began, "there was a serious incident yesterday. We received several complaints from parents and students." We need to talk about your behavior." He cleared his throat, trying to remain calm. "I was just doing my job. I can't be blamed for demanding discipline." I remained silent, observing him. It was astonishing how pride blinds. He spoke of discipline, but not of empathy. He spoke of method, but not of humanity. He was the kind of man who confuses authority with power, and power with cruelty. The principal took a deep breath. "Several students confirmed that you humiliated the boy in front of the class." He smiled disdainfully. "Oh, Principal, children exaggerate. Nowadays everything is considered humiliation. You can't even correct them anymore." Those words sent chills down my spine. "Correct?" I asked, unable to contain my firm tone. "You call shaming a child in front of 40 people correction?" He turned slowly to me. "Mr. Miller, I didn't know you were so sensitive." The principal intervened before I could answer. "What happened is unacceptable, and we need an apology. The least you can do is apologize." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mr. Collins leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Apologize? To a student? That would be admitting weakness. And if there's one thing an educator cannot show, it's weakness. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to contain my anger. "Weakness, Mr. Collins," I said calmly, "is not having the courage to admit one's own mistake. Strength is what my son showed when he read, even trembling, in front of everyone." He looked away, uncomfortable, but remained silent. The principal insisted, "An apology is necessary, and we expect you to make it today, in front of the class." He took a deep breath, stood up, and replied, "I'm sorry, but I'm not going to humiliate myself in front of children." That sentence hit me like a bomb. I stared at him. This isn't about humiliation, it's about reparation. There's a huge difference between the two. He gathered the papers from the table and said coldly, "Talk to the Director General if you want. I follow my convictions." That's when I realized that man would only learn the hard way. When we left the room, the principal looked at me, distressed. "Mr. Miller, what do you intend to do?" I took a deep breath and said, "Nothing right now. God hasn't told me the right time yet. But He will." Later, at recess, Lily approached Daniel. "The principal asked Mr. Collins to apologize, you know?" Daniel looked up hopefully. "And did he?" She lowered her head. "No. He said he would never do that." Daniel's smile faded into silence. He simply nodded, as if he had expected that answer. And in that instant, he learned something no child should learn so early, that human justice doesn't always happen at the right time. When I saw him leaving school that day, his face was serene, but there was something in his eyes, a small yet persistent light. "Dad," he said in the car, "God knows what's right, doesn't He?" I held his hand. "He does, son. And He never fails." That evening, I received an unexpected call. It was the principal again. "Mr. Miller, I just learned that the teacher made comments about you in the staff room. He said that you are an overprotective father, that you exaggerate." She smiled, even though her blood was boiling. "Don't worry, Director. He's just digging his own grave. The truth will come out in due time." She hesitated. "You speak so calmly. It's almost as if you know something I don't." I simply replied, "I only trust those who control time and justice." The next day, Daniel woke up feeling lighter. He said he still wanted to go to school. I hugged him and prayed with him before leaving, "Lord, give my son strength so that he may remain steadfast, even when the world is unjust." As he walked toward the gate, the sun began to timidly peek through the clouds. And I knew that day would be the turning point. Something inside me said, "Just hold on a little longer, the moment is coming." At lunchtime, I received a message from the principal. "The professor has been called to the principal's office. The principal wants to speak with him." I closed my laptop and smiled. God's timing had come. Mr. Collins entered that meeting expecting just another routine conversation. What he didn't know was that at that table would be someone he never imagined he would meet. Meanwhile, Daniel was in the classroom, writing an essay about courage. He wrote, "Courage is when we keep trying, even when everyone laughs at us." The substitute teacher read it silently, with tears in her eyes. Outside, the wind changed. The sky suddenly cleared. I looked at the clock and thought, now. I grabbed my car keys and drove to school, unhurried, with a peaceful heart. When I entered the parking lot, I saw teachers' cars, parents' cars, and Mr. Collins' car parked right in front. I parked and walked to the entrance. The security guards greeted me respectfully. After all, they knew who I was. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling God's presence with every step. That school had been my most expensive project, my greatest investment, and now it would be the stage for the most profound lesson I would ever teach. The professor was about to discover who Daniel's father actually was. And this revelation would change everything. I arrived at school early that day. The clock showed a little before 3 in the afternoon, but the parking lot was already almost empty. The distant sound of children's laughter contrasted with what I felt inside, a mixture of calm and purpose. I knew something was about to happen, and somehow everything was happening at the right time. I entered through the main door, greeting the receptionist with a restrained smile. She was surprised to see me. "Did you come to pick up Daniel early today?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "And perhaps to take care of a few things as well." The hallway was silent. Each of my steps echoed against the walls. I could hear, in the distance, Mr. Collins' voice, giving his last lesson of the day. There was something almost symbolic about being there, listening to that man repeat his words with the same confidence as always, unaware that the ground was about to disappear beneath his feet. I walked past the meeting room and saw the director, Mr. Howard, talking on the phone. He saw me, interrupted the call, and gave a nervous smile. "Mr. Miller, what a surprise! We were just talking about your son's case." I simply nodded. "Then this is the perfect time." As we were talking, the doorbell rang. The classroom doors opened, and the sound of footsteps and voices filled the hallways. Daniel appeared among the students, with the same sweet and shy look as always. When he saw me there, his eyes lit up, but were quickly mixed with confusion. "Dad, you came early." I hugged him tightly. "I came, son. And today, we're going to sort everything out." He frowned, curious. "Solve what?" I just smiled. "You'll see." Across the hall, Mr. Collins emerged from the room, carrying a stack of notebooks. When he saw me, he hesitated for a second. He tried to disguise it by straightening his posture. "Mr. Miller, have you come to pick up the boy?" he said, in a tone of false courtesy. "Yes, and also to talk to you," I replied calmly. "I think it's time we put some things into perspective." He raised his eyebrows, not fully understanding. "Of course, we can talk to the director if you want." "Excellent idea," I replied. And we continued together, he, Daniel, and I, toward the principal's office. The sound of our footsteps seemed to mark the rhythm of something inevitable. When we entered, the principal stood up quickly. "Ah, perfect. We were just about to discuss yesterday's case." He looked at me, then at the professor, and sensed the tension in the air. "Mr. Collins, please have a seat." The professor sat down reluctantly, still trying to maintain an air of superiority. I remained standing, with a tranquility that only someone who has surrendered control to God can possess. "Mr. Miller," the director began, "first of all, I want to apologize for what happened. We do not condone this type of behavior." I interrupted him gently. "Thank you, Mr. Howard. But I didn't come here for apologies." Silence fell. Mr. Collins looked at me, confused. "Then why did you come?" he asked defensively. I walked slowly to the window, looked at the courtyard full of children playing, and replied, "I came for justice." "And for truth." He snorted impatiently. "Look, Mr. Miller, if you're trying to intimidate me with legal threats, let me tell you that I have an impeccable record." "Nobody's talking about a lawsuit, Professor," I interrupted, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm talking about character." The director, not fully understanding, watched the exchange in silence. Daniel, sitting next to me, looked at me with a mixture of admiration and doubt. "Dad, what's happening?" he murmured. "Calm down, son. Everything's fine." I took a deep breath and placed a folder on the table. "Before we continue, do you know who the main benefactor of this school is?" I asked, looking at the professor. He hesitated. "Mr. Howard, I imagine." I looked at the director, who looked away. "Actually," I said, opening the folder, "it's me." The sound that followed was pure silence. A thick, almost sacred silence. Mr. Collins paled. The principal lowered his head, ashamed. Daniel's eyes widened in surprise. "Dad, you own the school?" "Yes, I am one of the founders and the main investor," I replied calmly. "But I never wanted anyone to know. I wanted Daniel to be treated like any other student. And look what happened." The professor stammered. I had no idea, Mr. Miller." "You didn't need to know," I interrupted. "You just needed to have compassion." His voice trembled. I apologize, sir. I didn't mean to—" "No, Professor," I said firmly. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to my son. Apologize to the child you humiliated in front of 40 people." Daniel looked at him, waiting. The professor hesitated, sweating. But his pride still spoke louder. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't believe it was that serious." I approached slowly. "So you believe that a child's suffering is relative? That pain has degrees of importance." He looked away, unable to answer. The director, for his part, seemed petrified. "Mr. Collins," I continued, "when a school loses the ability to see the value of a student, it loses the right to call itself a school. Here we don't train grades, we train people." Daniel began to cry silently. And, for the first time, the teacher seemed to feel ashamed. His hands trembled. I didn't know he was your son," he said, almost whispering. "And what if it weren't so?" I asked, looking at him firmly. "Would you have treated him differently? Does your empathy depend on surnames?" Silence returned. The principal cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Miller, I think the best course of action would be to suspend the teacher while we investigate." "No need," I interrupted. "The decision has already been made." Everyone looked at me, surprised. "From today onwards," I continued, "Mr. Collins is removed. And Daniel will remain here, but in a room where love teaches more than shame." The teacher turned pale. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way. The principal, who had been watching the scene through the half-open door, put her hand to her mouth in disbelief. Daniel stood up slowly, walked over to me, and hugged me tightly. "Dad, are you really the owner?" I smiled. "Son, God is the owner. I just manage a small part of what belongs to him." That was the first time I saw Professor Collins in complete silence. No justifications, no defenses. Just the weight of his own mistake falling upon him. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Sometimes, God places us before injustice not to humiliate us, but to teach us the value of forgiveness. But forgiveness, it wouldn't come now. Because what was about to happen in the following days would be far greater than anyone there could have imagined. The next day dawned calm, almost too quiet. The kind of calm that comes before the storm. News of Mr. Collins's dismissal had spread through the school like wildfire. Students whispered in the hallways, teachers avoided commenting, and the principal seemed to be constantly tense. I, on the other hand, was at peace. I knew that what had happened wasn't about revenge, but about purpose. God had allowed every detail, the pain, the embarrassment, the silence, so that something much greater could be revealed. Daniel woke up early and asked if I was still going to school. "Of course you are," I replied. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." He smiled, still insecure, but I sensed a new strength growing within him. Upon arriving, the school seemed different. The walls, the windows, even the sound of the birds, everything seemed to carry a new energy, a kind of invisible purification. And in the midst of all this, Professor Collins was also returning. Yes, he had been called back, not to teach, but for an extraordinary meeting with the administration, parents, and some teachers. He didn't know it, but that meeting would be a turning point in his life. When he entered the building, his face showed weariness. His arrogance was gone. His suit, once impeccable, was now wrinkled. His sunken eyes revealed a sleepless night. The man who considered himself unshakable now trembled before the uncertainty. In the principal's office, the chairs were arranged in a circle. The principal, the director, some teachers, and we were all waiting. Daniel was in the library, accompanied by the guidance counselor. He didn't know that this conversation would define the future of the school. "Mr. Collins," said the principal, his voice firm, "thank you for coming. This meeting is not just about what happened, but about what it represents." The professor nodded silently. "Before we begin," I said, "I'd like to hear from you. What have you learned these past few days?" The professor took a deep breath. "I learned that silence can be louder than any voice. That words can destroy more than we imagine." His voice faltered. It was the first time he had seen him so vulnerable. I kept looking at him, waiting for more. "And have you learned anything about what it means to teach?" He paused for a moment. "Teaching is serving. I forgot that. I spent so much time trying to be admired that I forgot to be human." The room fell silent. Even the principal discreetly wiped away a tear. Pride had crumbled. The man before us was no longer the same. "Mr. Collins," said the director, "you know that, legally, we could terminate your contract right now. But we believe in second chances. The decision, however, rests with Mr. Miller." All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that moment. I could simply accept the separation and end the story there. But something inside me, something bigger, told me there was still more to be done. "Professor," I began, "when I saw what you did to my son, I confess I wanted to take him away from here right away. But God told me something that hasn't left my mind since then. Whoever hasn't learned to forgive hasn't yet understood love." He lowered his head, visibly emotional. I don't deserve his forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "But I wish I could ask." "You can," I replied. "But not me." At that moment, I asked the advisor to bring Daniel into the room. The sound of the door opening was almost solemn. The boy entered, with timid steps, not understanding what was happening. When he saw the teacher, he stopped, hesitant. Mr. Collins stood up slowly. He walked over to him, his eyes welling with tears. "Daniel," he began, I don't have enough words. I was unfair. I was cruel. And there's no justification for it. I can only ask for your forgiveness." Daniel was quiet for a moment. The silence was so profound that you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, with the sweetness that only a pure child can possess, he said, "I forgive you, sir." Tears streamed freely down the professor's face. He knelt down, not caring who was watching. "You don't know how much this means to me." Daniel placed his hand on his shoulder and replied, "God forgives those who truly change." At that moment, the room transformed. The presence of something greater was palpable. No one spoke for long seconds. There was a peace there that didn't come from the world, it came from above. The director, his voice breaking, said, "I think we've just witnessed the true definition of education." Everyone silently agreed. Mr. Collins stood up and said, "If you'll allow me, I'd like to continue teaching here. But in a new way. I want to work with students who face difficulties, like Daniel. I want to help, not hurt." I looked at him, and I realized he was sincere. "Then begin now," I said, "with humility and purpose. Because teaching isn't about commanding, it's about healing." He nodded, crying. Daniel smiled shyly. And I, at that moment, felt that the purpose of it all was finally beginning to reveal itself. When we left the meeting, the principal walked me to the gate. "Mr. Miller," she said, "what happened today was a miracle." I smiled. "Miracles aren't the end of stories, Principal. They're the beginning." Outside, the sun shone brightly, reflecting off the school walls. Daniel held my hand and asked, "Dad, will he be good now?" I looked at him and replied, "God transforms even the hardest heart, son. Believe in that." But I didn't know that this public apology would open even bigger doors, and bring to light secrets that none of us imagined existed. Because Professor Collins' past still held something that nobody knew. And that truth, when it came to light, would change everything again. After that meeting, something profoundly changed at the school. The air was lighter, the conversations kinder. Even the way the teachers looked at each other seemed different. Mr. Collins' transformation had become everyone's topic of conversation, but, more than that, an example. Daniel, for his part, had begun to truly smile again. He seemed to finally believe that the world could be just, even after so much suffering. "Dad, do you think people really change?" he asked me one night. I replied, "Yes, son. When God touches the heart, even the impossible changes." But, as always happens, life still held an unexpected revelation. Mr. Collins' past was about to come to light, and with it, an explanation that would make even the hardest of hearts understand the reason for it all. The following week, the teacher officially returned to the school, this time as a mentor for students with learning difficulties. I observed him from afar, guiding Daniel with patience, something I never thought I would see. He was like a different man. One day, after class, he discreetly called me over. "Mr. Miller, may I show you something?" We went to the library. There, on the table, was an old leather folder, worn with age. He carefully opened it. Inside, there were old papers, photographs, and a yellowed school report card. "This is my past," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I thought you should know why I became the way I did." I picked up one of the photos. It was of a frail boy with sad eyes and messy handwriting scribbled in a notebook. "That was me," the teacher continued. "I also had dyslexia." His words chilled me to the bone. "You had it too?" He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "Yes." "And nobody knew. Nobody believed me. Back then, they called it laziness. I grew up hearing that I was stupid, that I would never amount to anything." I was speechless. He continued, "I promised myself I would never be weak, that I would be the best, that no one would ever make me feel small again. But, without realizing it, I became what I hated most." That confession hit me like a bolt of lightning. All his pride, all his hardness. Now it made sense. He didn't humiliate out of malice. He humiliated out of fear. Fear of seeing in Daniel the same boy he was trying to forget inside himself. "I saw your son making a mistake, and it was like looking at my own reflection," she said, sobbing. "And I couldn't bear it. I hurt him because I still carried within me the voice of the one who hurt me." I listened to him in silence, feeling a mixture of compassion and pain. "Professor, sometimes God makes us rediscover our past in other people, so that we may finally forgive them." He nodded, weeping. "Daniel healed me, Mr. Miller. He showed me what true courage is. He did what I never could, face my mistakes without fear. For the first time, I saw that man truly broken, but not destroyed. Broken to be rebuilt. Like clay in the potter's hands." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "Because there's something I need to do. Something I've never done in my life." The next morning, he asked for permission to make a statement at the school's weekly assembly. The principal hesitated, but agreed. "He deserves this chance," I said. The auditorium was full. Students, parents, teachers, all curious. Daniel was in the front row, next to Lily. When Mr. Collins went up on stage, there was absolute silence. He started slowly. "For many years, I thought that teaching meant correcting, that mistakes were the enemy of greatness. But today I understand that mistakes are the first step towards courage." His words echoed like a prayer. "I want to apologize to all the students I have ever hurt with my words, and especially to one, the boy who taught me what humility is." He looked at Daniel. "You, Daniel, you showed me the face of God when you decided to forgive me." People began to cry. The entire auditorium stood up in respectful silence. Daniel went up on stage and hugged him, to applause that seemed endless. The professor continued, with tears in his eyes, "When I was your age, Daniel, nobody believed in me. But today, looking at you, I realize that God never gave up on me. He was just waiting for the right moment to heal me." The principal discreetly wiped his eyes. The headmistress wept openly. Even the most distracted students were silent, feeling the weight of what they were witnessing. "I promise," said the teacher, "that from today onward, every child who makes a mistake with me will find patience, not contempt. Because love is the only path that truly teaches." It was impossible to hold back the tears. I looked at Daniel, overcome with emotion, and remembered the child who arrived shy and insecure, and now was changing hearts. He had not only overcome his pain, he had become an instrument of transformation. After the speech, Mr. Collins approached me again. "Mr. Miller," he said, "thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. If you had, I would never have understood what it truly means to teach." I replied calmly, "It wasn't me who spared you. It was God. He knew there was still something inside you that could flourish." He smiled, relieved. "You know what's most ironic? Today, the person who teaches me the most is the one I should be teaching." When I got home with Daniel, he looked out the car window and said, "Dad, Mr. Collins isn't the same anymore." I smiled. No one is, after being touched by the truth. But what he didn't know was that the final step of this journey was still missing, the one that would close the cycle with faith, love, and forgiveness. Because God never ends a story without first leaving his final mark. The following week, the school organized a special ceremony. It would be Forgiveness and Overcoming Day. An idea suggested by Mr. Collins himself, now transformed, reborn with purpose. The principal immediately accepted, moved by the change that had taken hold of him, and, in a way, of all of us. Daniel helped put together posters with inspirational phrases. "Learning is trying again," one of them said. Another said, "Making mistakes isn't falling, it's starting to fly again." He drew everything carefully, letter by letter, without worrying about the mistakes. Each stroke was a victory. When the day arrived, the gymnasium was packed. Parents, students, teachers. The air smelled of hope. Soft music played in the background and colorful balloons floated from the ceiling. But the atmosphere wasn't one of an ordinary celebration, it was one of redemption. I sat in the front row, watching Daniel help Mr. Collins arrange the chairs. The scene seemed like something out of a dream. The boy who had been humiliated was now walking side by side with the man who had hurt him. Only God does something like that. When the microphone was turned on, silence fell. The professor stepped onto the stage, wearing a simple shirt and a genuine smile. He looked at the audience and said, "Today, I am not here as a professor. I am here as a student." He paused, looking at Daniel. "For years, I thought teaching meant molding others in my image. But life has shown me that the true master is the one who allows himself to be molded as well." His words seemed to touch everyone present. It was impossible not to feel something. Even the most distracted students stared intently, as if they wanted to etch that moment into their memory. "I hurt him unintentionally," he continued. "I spoke without thinking. But God gave me a second chance, through a boy who never gave up believing in goodness." Daniel, seated at the front, discreetly wiped his eyes. The audience was in absolute silence, some already weeping. Mr. Collins took a deep breath and said, "Therefore, I dedicate this day to all those who have been judged before they were understood." He extended his hand to Daniel. "Come here, my little teacher." The audience erupted in applause. Daniel went up slowly, a little shy, but smiling. The teacher hugged him in front of everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Collins said, "this child has taught me more about life than all the books I've ever read." The entire auditorium rose to its feet. People clapped, some prayed, others simply watched in silence, their hearts heavy. It was more than a tribute, it was a living testament to faith and transformation. The principal took the microphone and, with tears in her eyes, said, "Today, our school learned what it truly means to educate. It is to look beyond the mistakes and see the heart." Daniel shyly picked up the microphone. "I just want to say that everyone makes mistakes, and that God always helps those who keep trying." His simplicity cut through the air like poetry. The teacher, visibly moved, placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and added, "And whoever learns to forgive also learns to live in peace." At that moment, I realized something I will never forget. Sometimes, life's greatest lessons are given by those whom the world calls weak. Because God uses the small to confound the wise. When the ceremony ended, many went to embrace Mr. Collins. Parents, students, colleagues. He received each gesture with humility, as someone who finally understands the value of forgiveness. Then he approached me. "Mr. Miller," he said, "thank you for not giving up on me. You could have taken everything from me, but you gave me what I needed most, a second chance. I replied calmly, "The second chance didn't come from me, Professor. It came from the same God who has patiently waited for you until today." He nodded, visibly moved. "I intend to dedicate the rest of my life to teaching children like Daniel. I want to help them see that there's nothing wrong with learning differently." He smiled. "So now you understand. True education isn't in books, it's in the eyes of those who teach with love." Daniel ran to me and hugged me. "Dad, everything turned out all right, didn't it?" I hugged him back and said, "It did, son. Because God always writes the last chapter with tenderness." As we left the gymnasium, the sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the wooden floor with golden hues. It was as if the sky itself was smiling. In the car, Daniel looked out the window and murmured, "Dad, Mr. Collins said he's going to start a group to help kids like me. He's going to let me help too." "Of course he will, son," I replied. "Who better to teach courage than the one who had to find it within his own pain?" While driving, I looked at his reflection in the mirror and thought, pain is God's chisel. He uses each blow to sculpt us into something greater. And I realized that, in the end, it wasn't the story of a teacher and a student. It was the story of two hearts healed by the same love. That night, before going to sleep, Daniel prayed, "Lord, thank you for transforming evil into good, and for letting me be a part of your miracle." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, because, in that instant, I knew that the most important lesson had been learned, not just by us, but by everyone who witnessed the power of forgiveness. Faith had won, and that heavy silence of humiliation, which had once dominated the room, was now replaced by a new kind of silence, the silence of peace. Looking back, I realized that this story was never just about a teacher and a student. It was about all of us, about the times we judged before understanding, about the wounds we carried in silence, and about the power that forgiveness has to transform even the hardest heart. How many times in your life has someone made you feel small? How many times have you believed that your mistake defined you, when in reality it only shaped you? The truth is, we've all been Daniel at some point, trying to decipher what life is writing to us, stumbling over the lines, confusing the letters, but persisting nonetheless. Because that's what faith is, continuing to try, even when the world seems to laugh at our falls. And perhaps we too have been Collins, hardened by the pains of the past, unintentionally hurting, repeating what once hurt us. But when God enters the story, what was guilt becomes learning, and what was shame becomes light. Today, Daniel is a confident young man, and Mr. Collins has become a beloved mentor, known for his patience and kindness. The school, once shrouded in silence, is now known by only one word, hope. And every time I see that boy smiling, I remember the verse he kept in his pocket on the day of his humiliation, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." Because it was this faith, simple, childlike, and unwavering, that changed the destiny of us all. Now I ask you, have you forgiven someone who hurt you? Have you allowed God to transform an old resentment into a blessing? Or is there still a Collins hidden inside you, just needing a Daniel to heal him? If this story touched your heart, I invite you to reflect on it, share it, and pass this message on. You never know who might need to hear exactly this today. And before I go, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If this message inspired you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. This way you help this story reach more people and spread more faith around the world. May God bless your life with love, health, peace, and the courage to start over as many times as necessary. Because, in the end, the real lesson is this: no one is too small to teach, nor too great to learn.